السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, welcome to our course on 77 Principles for Successful Families. And this is lesson number 3, in which we're looking at some of the key principles of a blessed family life. Just to recap very quickly, in the second lesson, we looked at key principles of successful, blessed Muslim marriages. So, and we began lesson 2 with principle number 8, which is that it's very important as when we approach marriage to conduct our marriage ceremonies in a manner that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this also applies if one is married. This is one of the most practical religious counsels one can give someone. People do all kinds of planning. The most fundamental thing is, first step is, keep it halal. Okay? And make it beautiful, but in halal ways. Number 9 is to have a good marriage contract and agreement. And this is one of the most critical things that we touched upon in the second lesson. And if you missed it, do review that lesson, because a lot of people don't pay attention to having a good, proper Islamic marriage contract. And in our times, we contend that it's very important to have a clear marriage agreement that covers those issues where there may be confusion or disagreement. Number 10 is that you should cultivate 2 key qualities in the marriage. Now, what is it that keeps a relationship together? The 2 key qualities are mawadda and rahma, are love and mercy.
Number 11 is gratitude. That is thanking Allah for choosing this spouse for you, that you recognize that it's not you who chose your spouse, that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so there's a wisdom in that. The 12th one was commitment. Be committed until the end and loyal to your spouse, that one recognizes that it's a long-term relationship and you don't sort of second guess it and think, that the grass is greener on the other side, that you're fully committed, until the end for your marriage, inshallah. 13 was to not expect perfection from one spouse, to have that mercy with the other person and recognize, sometimes people make mistakes and we have to be easygoing with them. 14th was to praise your spouse in their presence and absence, and to beware of the opposite, especially with regard to joking. And in that point, we were emphasizing the importance of not joking in a hurtful manner that could hurt the other person's feelings.
So today, those are some of the key principles related to a blessed marriage. We're going to expand the point further. Now, what are some of the foundational principles of a blessed family? Okay? And we're looking here at key teachings and values in the Quran and the Sunnah of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we begin with the 15th of the 77 principles that we'll be covering in this course, which is have a solid intention to help your family members to be the best of believers. Okay? Have a solid intention to help your family members be the best of believers. And this applies firstly to you yourself. What am I seeking through this marriage? Okay? And it's very important for us as believers to realize that what are we up to in this life? And a lot of people get confused about this. There's a great wisdom why we're commanded every Jumu'ah to recite Surah Al-Kahf. Because Surah Al-Kahf closes with a fundamental reminder. فَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. Whoever hopes for the meeting of their Lord, let them perform actions that are righteous. Right? What am I doing in this life? I am getting ready to meet my Lord. What am I doing in this life? I am striving to attain unto my eternal destination in the hereafter. And this is what I'm aspiring to myself, and this is why I have come together with someone in marriage. What am I doing with my children? I am not just there taking care of them. I am not just there educating them. Why am I educating them? Why am I spending on them? Why am I spending time with them? All of this is for a purpose, which is the hereafter. And the hereafter is our eternal standing. So have a solid intention to help your family members to be the best of believers. And this, of course, is mentioned in the Noble Quran,
where there's the verse in Surah 25, verse 74, our Lord bless us with prized spouses and offspring will be the joy of our hearts and make us models for the righteous. So, how do the scholars define this?
So, this idea, right? This dua of the righteous, that رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ, that, O Lord, grant us in our spouses and in our offspring a joy for our hearts. وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, and make us imams of the people of piety. Right? That make us, meaning make me. Right? So I'm just trying to be a good Muslim in life. No, that's not. I'm just trying to just get by. What am I doing in marriage? Well, we're a Muslim family. No. وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, make us of the foremost of the people of taqwa. So we, as believers, we have a purpose. And the purpose is not just to get by, but not even to get by. Right? For a blessed family, you have high purpose. Right? So we're not just, oh Allah, make us get into paradise. No, make us of the muttaqeen, make us of the people of righteousness, of mindfulness, of taqwa. No, we say, وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا, make us, meaning make me, make my spouse, make my children, make my family, the foremost of the people of taqwa. So this is what we aspire towards. Right? This is what we aspire towards.
And it's important to remember here too, when we're striving to help one another to be of the best believers, of the people of your household, that there are certain things that you can do to encourage one another to become better believers, such as you can strive to seek knowledge as a family. And there's a few ways you can do that. One is that, right from the early days, that the husband can be easygoing with the wife and encourage her to seek knowledge, and might be easygoing in terms of you don't have to cook or anything tonight. We're going to go to a class and then I'm going to take you out for dinner. So it's just nice family traditions where knowledge is emphasized, and then you have that easygoingness. So that's one example of how you can seek knowledge, in terms of going to classes, and even later on when you have children, that you can take them to these classes where they can benefit. But there, again, you would emphasize to the children the importance of having good manners or akhlaq during the class, right from a young age, so that they can learn the adab of seeking knowledge and encourage them to.
But it's very important to also make that memorable for them, right? So that, for example, you make it seem like a special thing. We're going as a family to this class, right? And this is really important. It's something very special, right? So they go prepared, they go excited, maybe they get a treat, right? Especially initially, you encourage that, but you make it a beautiful, right? So you have to package the two things together, right? That this is what our family is about. So we're going to the class. You instill in them love for the teachers, right? You instill in them love for the place. Oh, that's so special. And they remember it fondly. So when we set our standards of discipline and expectation, even from when they're small, but they do it because it's so special. They do it because, afterwards we're going to go, and of course don't make it punitive. We didn't do this, okay, so we're not going to go to Tim Hortons, or we're not going to go grab a meal just because you guys made a little sound, whatever. But you make it a beautiful experience, but develop these good habits that together facilitate for you to strive to be the best of believers. Assist one another, right? Assist one another. So if the husband is attending a class a reasonable number of times a week, see that as part of their positive pursuit. The wife as well, like if facilitate for her, but also see what you can do as a family. Right? If one of the two is taking a class online, for example, don't take that negatively. But at the same time, it's important to emphasize balance, right? Balance. That don't make religious endeavors an escapism from having a good relationship with one another, right? So that's also very critical. It's very important to have balance, right? Between the spouses, but also with the children, right? Because otherwise, there's a phenomenon called the preacher's children, where outwardly they're just doing everything right. They sing well, they recite well, they have the outward courtesies, but inwardly they hate the whole thing. So we have to be very careful of things like that.
And also, when we're talking about helping one another to be of the best believers, a common mistake is that, as the children are growing up, that we emphasize education for them, but they see no evidence of the parents being interested in Islamic learning or striving to increase in knowledge. So, for example, when they're learning the Quran or memorizing the Quran, it should be that everybody in the house is striving to memorize from a different part of the Quran. So they should see that, that when the time comes for them to start learning, that they see their parents also keen to increase their skills in for example, reading or memorizing, or if it's a subject like that, their parents are also keen to review, for example, their fiqh. So they should see it as a family endeavor, not just something for children, that only children need Islamic education, which is one of the reasons we believe in our Seekers Guidance is the initiative is that everybody needs to learn, right? It's adults as well. It's a very important lifelong endeavor to seek knowledge. Secondly, it's very important to help others to become the best of believers through one's own conduct. So when one conducts themselves very well with their family, it's very common for them to want to be like you, right? It's a red light. If your family sort of flees from you, Sheikh Mohsen, sorry, I forgot his name. He was talking about the family where, the family cringes when the husband walks in the door, just from the way he conducts himself. So you want to strive to conduct yourself in the best of ways, so that, and in ways that the Prophet ﷺ conducted himself, and in just how kind and caring he was with other people, that they want to be like you, and they want to strive to become better, and they learn the characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ just in how you conduct yourself, subhanAllah. Because sometimes I think, when you see a family member, it's very common for example, maybe one spouse is more practicing than the other, and they try to help their spouse, or quote unquote help, but it's by, being excessively harsh with that person, continuously asking them about fearing the fire, or, you're going to perish, and these are not things that would inspire someone to start practicing. So and I think it's sometimes we think it's a quick fix, that if we're harsh with them, it'll speed up, they'll wake up, and then they'll start practicing. And it's actually the opposite, that sometimes we drive away other people from the deen just in how we're talking to them, right? So it's something to be very wary of. and to strive to implement and conduct ourselves in the best of ways so that we can inspire our families likewise to strive to become of the best of believers.
Do you want to mention the question you asked Mufti Taqi's sister in Karachi? No, so when we were in Karachi, we were in 2007. I became friends with one of the scholars who owns a book publishing company in Pakistan. He was the nephew of one of the leading scholars alive, Mufti Taqi Usmani. And this scholar, Sheikh Fahim Ashraf, he invited us to his home, and his mother was there. And his mother is the sister of Mufti Taqi Usmani. And Mufti Taqi's brother is a scholar, and other members of the family are scholars. Their father was one of the great scholars of the 20th century as well. And Umar met with her and noticed the mother was also a very pious, righteous woman, engaged, even while they're having lunch, engaged in dhikr. So do you remember what you asked her? Okay. So I heard this from Umar, but so Umar asked, how did your father raise you? Because so many of the children, there are a number of children, they're all learned, they're all known for their righteousness and for their service. So she said that our father didn't speak much about religion to us, right? But he was so noble in his own conduct and so inspiring in his example that all the children wanted to be like him, right? And that's really the key to parenting, right? The Prophet ﷺ used the metaphor of the shepherd. Each of you is a shepherd, and each of you is responsible for their flock. It's only a failed shepherd who says, okay, I want to go in that direction with my flock. So what am I going to do? I'm going to tie a rope around the neck of the sheep, of the flock. I'm going to drag them. Because what's going to happen? You're either going to give up or you're going to kill the flock. Right? Of course, metaphorically speaking, right? But similarly, when the shepherd is doing things right, who's setting the direction? The shepherd. But where does the shepherd walk? Behind the flock. So who's walking in the direction that the shepherd has set? The flock. And that's like cruise control for the shepherd. And the shepherd has set the direction and instilled in the flock the concern, the commitment, the inspiration, the motivation, the example to go in the direction that they need to be going. Right? And that takes time, and we'll be talking about many of the principles related to that.
The 16th principle is to seek to serve and not to be served. So seek to serve and not to be served. So one strives to serve their family members. So I really hope with these recordings and people listening that we're not talking about the wife serving the family and that's all there is to it. Rather, it's every single member of the family that should be striving to serve one another, and especially when you have children, it's so important to keep emphasizing this to them, that each one of them should strive to serve one another. And as we know, especially we have a house full of teenagers now, alhamdulillah. So it's striving to inculcate in their character that it is an honor to serve one another. And I think, especially with your siblings, that can be challenging. So it's something that we continuously emphasize, that it's an honor to serve one another, and for every single action that a person does for another person, there's a reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one should rush and be avid for that, and not even think twice about it. There was a class I was conducting with a group of sisters, and one of them was complaining about, but I don't understand, why am I the one that has to pick up my husband's socks? And so I was trying to emphasize to her that it's an honor to help and get a reward in any way you can by serving another person. And this is not something just for the women. Like, it's likewise if, for example, if I was someone to leave my socks around, that if my husband was the one to pick them up smiling and put them in the laundry, that he earns the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not a one-way street. That I think in a lot of Muslim homes there's this misperception that the women have to do everything and like the men are just being served. It's not the case. Rather, in a Muslim household where everyone is striving to seek the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by serving one another, that each one is racing in the good, racing in trying to be thoughtful, trying to serve the people of that household and earn that reward for any little thing that they can do for another person, whether it be getting them something that they need, seeing that they're tired and getting them a drink without being asked, doing anything they can to bring happiness to the other people. As we know, there's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that entering happiness into the heart of another believer, it earns tremendous rewards. So what about the people that we live with, the people who are closest to us, that is even much greater in that respect. We also were reminded that Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, how was the Prophet ﷺ at home? And the answer was that he was in the service of his family, that he would, when he was with his family, that he was known to even sweep the floors or mend his own clothes, that he wasn't expecting to be served at all times, that he was also serving his family. So likewise, we can all learn from that example, that it's not something just for the women to do, that the men are likewise honored by serving their family in this way.
And in that regards, the scholars mentioned that it's also important to correct certain notions, right? That according to 3 of the 4 schools of Islamic law, the relied upon position is that a woman is not obligated to perform household chores, even if she is not working. Okay? But it is from the Sunnah. It is from the Sunnah, they say it is from the precedent of Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidah Fatima, that he was working outside the house, that Sayyidina Ali was working outside the house, and the Prophet ﷺ encouraged her to take care of the affairs of the house. But many primary texts make that very clear, that this is recommended, not an obligation. Right? Recommended, so one has to treat it that way. Right? That the husband, at best can request, but it's requesting from someone who is willfully doing something. They don't have the right of demanding particular things, but at the same time, they say, the scholars explain that this beautiful balance, how is it played out? You encourage the husband to be of service to his family. You encourage the wife, and particularly his own wife. You encourage the wife to be of service to her husband and to try to outdo each other. فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ Rush with each other to do the good. And to emphasize to each that it's not the duty of the other person to do what you want them to do. So the husband forgot to do the groceries, it's not his responsibility. You have to work together to handle these things. So this is from this beautiful balance, that seek to serve, not to be served. And this cultivates a central Islamic virtue, which is the reality of our religion, which is nasiha, seeking good with respect to another. That religion itself, said the Prophet ﷺ, is this quality of seeking good with respect to another. Number 1. Number 2, this is what our iman is based on. None of you believes until they wish for others of the good that they wish for themselves. So this doesn't just apply to someone who's a new Muslim or some stranger. It begins with those in your most immediate circle. And we took the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that the best of the believers, most perfect in faith, are those best in character, and the best of you are those best to their families. And also, Marriage is a test of one's humility. Humility. That sometimes you may feel that the person didn't do what you reasonably expected. Okay? Then you'd agreed to something, but they didn't do it. To have humility. Okay? To have humility. To have empathy for the other. Maybe something came up. Maybe they were not well. Maybe they forgot. Maybe, be able to make excuses. And this is why marriage is such a test of noble character. Related to that,
the 17th principle is try not to be burdensome on others, lest they are accountable before Allah for not helping you. So that point is about how that, when you live in a household, that sometimes when you ask someone for help, or you ask them, can you do this for me? Or they're asking for your help and you say no, and you don't even have a good reason for not helping them, that, on the day of judgment, you could be asked, somebody asked you for help and you didn't help them. Like, what is the reason for that? So if we keep that in mind, that when we are asking others for things and we know they're not going to comply, it might be better to, if you can, to just sort of try and do things on one's own, not to be a burden on the people around you in your house, and to strive to, again, it goes back to that principle of serving rather than being served. Like, trying to do things or not be the cause of someone else getting, something bad on their record because of you, right? That you asked them for help and they didn't agree. Or, you were, or it might even be that you are somebody who causes a lot of work in the house, like if you are somebody who leaves things around a lot, and you're causing grief for the other people because they have to keep taking care of you without a need, like the person's not handicapped or sick or anything. That's sometimes we have. There's this book that we're reading, Atomic Habits, and it's taught by James Clear, and he talks a lot about sometimes we have negative habits, right? A lot of us do. Habits that, things we shouldn't be doing, or, that are maybe annoying to other people, and how we can strive to work on those characteristics and rid them from our character. So this point on trying not to be burdensome on others, so that they're not accountable before Allah for not helping you, it's like that. So you don't want to cause any kind of burden for the other people in your household.
But part of this also relates to coming to mutual agreement about the way the family runs, right? And they say that, agreement dispels dispute, right? There's an obvious thing to say, but, a lot of people lead chaotic marriage lives, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen, who's going to do what, right? So it's important to discuss these things. Okay, how do we together address these challenges, right? So for example, if the husband's messy, so it's not just that, okay, you better clean your things, right? So it's how do we address these challenges together and to learn to come to agreement on these, so then it's not a burden, not just in terms of what is expected of another person, but how they deal with things. This same principle, not to be a burden on others, is like avoid being a freeloader, right? Not just, just as a husband or as a wife, but also as parents. That if you inculcate enough spirit of service in your kids, they say just get the kids to do the chores. Like we're at a family gathering and everyone was done, and it was said in jest, but some people actually behave like this. Someone in the family told their youngest one, said, get up and pick up the dishes. Why did we give birth to you? Right? Yallah, hurry up. So don't do that kind of stuff. But also don't freeload off your family. Right? that you just visit your parents to get a free meal. Right? Don't be a burden on them. Rather, be the one who serves. Right? Be the one who serves. Very often we are a burden on family members because we maintain family ties just by showing up to people's invitations. And this is tough because, we live, nuclear families are a historic aberration. People live in the context of family networks, extended families. People live in the context of neighborhoods and communities. And these are circles of mercy, right? Circles of mercy, because a person didn't have to cook daily because you're living with other people. Neighbors shared, families shared, friends shared. We used to get so much food from our landlord. We lived under our landlord that eventually we had to ask, could you skip a few times? Because anytime they cooked anything special, we'd get it. And one of us was not a big fan of Arab food. I was, but she's like, can we do without it at least? Because literally, especially in Ramadan, every day we'd get food. So much that I'd give it to some of the single guys. So don't be a burden on others, but rather, in our relationships with others, have the spirit of service. How we'll look later in the course about family life, that family life, like when it comes to maintaining ties of family with your siblings, with relatives, it's the reward of maintaining family ties is not just showing up to family things, but try, same thing, to be of service to them. Don't be, you go visit them, you expect a meal. Maintaining that, look at how you can be a means of good. And this of course helps navigate a lot of family life, because if someone is sick, be the one who visits. If someone has a difficulty, be the one who goes and helps them. Right? Someone needs to go to the hospital, be the one who assists. Right? Rather than this being a burden on them. And they say this is the foundation of adab, is not to be a burden on others.
And also, just on that same point, when we're talking about helping others in one's household and not being a burden, that it reminds me also of the saying from in the beginning of guidance, where Imam Ghazali specifies that, that we should strive to be like angels in gatherings, and by that he meant that we strive to serve anyone like in the gathering by doing good to those people, striving to serve them in any way we can. He said that's the best of believers. The midway of that is for a person to not bring any harm or benefit to the people in the gathering or in one's household. And that's like being an inanimate object, that you're just like there, like a table in a room. It's not, well, it's bringing benefit, it's bringing beauty, but it's not harming anyone, and it's not bringing a particular amount of benefit as compared to the first person, right, who's striving to serve. And the worst of people is someone who brings harm to the gathering or harm to one's household. And that's through bad conduct, perhaps they're backbiting, perhaps they're causing trouble or causing fights amongst people. So he said, beware of being of that last group of people. And he said, if you can't, then sleep is better for you, so you don't harm other people or bring harm to other people. So, sorry.
So related to that, when it comes to family gatherings, etc., and for many people, family gatherings can be challenging, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that لا خير في كثير من نجواهم. There is no good whatsoever in many of their private gatherings. So what does one do? The verse gives us keys. We'll be looking at this further. One of the ways to have a positive contribution to your family relations is when you go to a family gathering, now as concerned believers, we don't want to be part of gossiping. We don't want to be part of if people are watching haram things, etc. Simple thing. Actually, frankly, for some of us, it gets boring too. Like just sitting there, like discussing, like my in-laws are from Hyderabad, like they're discussing different types of biryani again, right, or whatever. So what do? One thing is just go serve. Get up, grab the tea, and go serve it, right? Instead of to expect to be served, and that way you don't have to like be stuck in an awkward conversation. Right? Go, just fill some cups of water. Go, the elders in the family go. So would you like some water? Right? And this is part of, be making a positive contribution. You visit someone's house, help them with the setup and the cleanup. And one of the benefits this has of being proactive and service-oriented is that then, let's say something and say, okay, now let's sit and watch the Bollywood movie. You can say, we have an appointment. You made an appointment with your dining table that you're going to review the summer intensive class. But if you are serving and you are making this positive contribution, how can they really object? Right? Because you are a source of good, and that's one of the practical tips that we found very beneficial. You go somewhere, there's weddings. Weddings tend to degenerate, right? They start kind of okay, people just milling, etc. Then start getting full, but then it hits some crazy fitna peak, right? So if you're going to do something which some people may consider strange, that when they're doing the Grand Haram entrance, you just kind of step away till it gets back to the sane and halal. But now they may think, what a weirdo, what are these guys doing? Why are they standing outside? But if before that you helped set up, the people who showed up early, you just grabbed the tea, you gave the tea, you were, being socially proactive, then people don't really care. Right? People don't really care. Right? Because the Prophet ﷺ told us, جُبِلَتِ النُّفُوسَ عَلَى حُبِّ مَنْ أَحْسَنَ إِلَيْهَا, that people instinctively incline to liking those who do good to them. And the Prophet ﷺ told us, you can't reach everyone with your wealth, you can't reach everyone with your status, but you can reach everyone through your good character. Right? So that helps navigate these sensitive situations in family, and also helps socially as well, at work and so on. Okay? That you're at work, there's some kind of social gathering, so you show up, but you know that later they'll be serving alcohol, whatever, you're going to disengage then. Instead of being the weird one out, don't be passive. Be proactive. That's the prophetic akhlaq. The Prophet ﷺ used to serve those who came to his house himself. Before we move on from that, and the amazing example of that, right, of this idea of not being a burden, but being the one who serves. When I was in Damascus, one of the very senior scholars of Damascus, one of the Imams of Islamic spirituality of the 20th century, Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Shahuri, rahimahullah, he had his second stroke when I was in Syria. It's like 1998, 1999 perhaps. And people were expecting he's just going to die. When we went to visit him in the hospital a few times, they were just expecting that these are the last days. I recall standing outside with Sheikh Abdul Rahman's his servant, his personal assistant. So I was like, and remembering that, one day we'll be able to say to our children and grandchildren, we met Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Shahuri. But he got somewhat better, and they moved him home, but he was on the hospital bed. And people weren't allowed to visit because his health was so sensitive that even taking visitors, especially once he was outside the hospital, was dangerous. And it was known in Damascus amongst the religious that you can't visit Sheikh Abdul Rahman. Then I had a close friend of mine visit from Canada. He said, can I visit Sheikh Abdul Rahman? I said, well, you're not supposed to. He said, really? I said, well, however, Islamically, you do have the right to knock on someone's door. They don't have the responsibility to answer, let alone let you in. But are we allowed to knock on someone's door? Ring their doorbell? Yeah. So let's go and try. So we went up. And Sheikh Abdul Rahman's house was in the highest point on the hill, on the mountain overlooking Damascus. So we went, this highest bus stop was right in front of his house. He got there, rang the doorbell. His son looks at me like I just landed from Mars. Because I used to attend the gatherings. But there are people, and So he didn't really say anything, but he's looking at me like wondering, how do I tell this guy that what the heck are you doing at my father's door? And I just looked up innocently and I was like, Assalamu alaikum. Awkward silence. I said, my friend's here from Canada, he wanted to visit Sheikh Abdurrahman. And he was shocked because I think we were the first people who tried that. And actually, two of my teachers had finished their full Islamic studies. They got their ijaza as ulama. And they asked if they could visit Sheikh Abdurrahman for him to sign it as one of their main teachers. Sheikh Abdurrahman's personal attendant said, there's no way. He said, can we just send the paper? He said, no. Because even if the germs from the paper, they said, sorry, he can't sign it. And I was there when they asked. I just showed up. So we were let in after a few minutes of tension inside, like, what's going on. So we got in. Benefits of knocking on doors. And I told my friend, look, the adab of visiting someone sick is to keep it very brief. Right? You don't want to be a burden. So you're going to go, just ask him for dua, kiss his hand, and leave. We did just that. And he was, bedridden, and literally is like bones with just skin, like really. He couldn't actually lift his hand, but he did. He raised a finger and he just shook it. I said, no. He said, and he whispered, because he couldn't even make a sound, that you have to eat something. So he just pointed, sit down. So his son's looking there, he's not, and he's very noble, but not quite so expansive. The son takes a deep breath, went and grabbed some sweets. And they have these candied fruits, they're very characteristically Damascus. So he brought that. Now he was going to serve, and Sheikh Abdurrahman made a noise, and he pointed to put it on his lap. And he's lying in the hospital bed. And he could pick them up himself, but he had his son hold his own hand, Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Shawari, to hold his hand, and he himself put the candied fruits, because we were his guests. So he served himself with his own hand. So he said, I told my friend, put it in your pocket and let's go. He said, no. Eat it here. So we did. And I'm like, okay. We asked for a dua. He said, no, pray for me. I said, okay, we gotta go. Because I'm going to be in big trouble with Sheikh Abdurrahman's personal attendant. Because he broke the protocols and he stayed there all this time. So we went, kissed his hand, so we need to go. He raised his finger again. He said, لَابُدَّ مِنَ التَّحَلِّمِ, that you must taste something sweet before you go. And this is one of the sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ, that he said that when people part, وَلَا يَفْتَرِقُونَ إِلَّا عَنْ ذَوَاقٍ, then when people would be in the gathering of the Prophet ﷺ, they would not part except that they had tasted something sweet. And they said there's not only sweets, but they had something nice, or that a sweet word, something inspiring, encouraging. But the ulama took it seriously that they always serve something sweet, even if it be candy when people are leaving. So again, his son brought out the candy, and he's used to it, because this is the way of this noble scholar for 6-7 decades of his life. He died in his 90s. So he gave us the candy by himself in his hand. Again, his hand had to be lifted by his son, but serving, right? Even though he's like the senior most scholars in Damascus, the first person they'd visit on Eid would be Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Shawari, who is one of the senior most and oldest scholars in Damascus. But this is the idea of your service and making things easy for people, right? Rather than burdening them. It's not easy. And this, of course, all relates to point number 19.
Okay, that each person should commit to exemplifying prophetic character. So as we can see from this example that Sheikh Faraz just gave, this is someone who was, his life's blood was emulating the Prophet's way. So honoring the guest is something very much with the Sunnah. So we can see that even despite his condition, how he was so committed to, exemplifying the Prophet ﷺ in that respect, despite his illness, that subhanAllah, it just sort of makes you reflect on how committed are you to exemplifying prophetic character. So the first part of exemplifying prophetic character is firstly knowing who the Prophet ﷺ was and what were his characteristics, and that's something that a lot of us aren't familiar enough with. In the book, Our Master Muhammad, the author starts by saying that although we've lost the opportunity of being with the Prophet ﷺ in person, we haven't lost the opportunity to read about his character and how he was. So that's something that all of us are capable of doing, and it should be a part of our homes that we are, that we love to read about his characteristics, and then likewise strive to implement them. We know that, when you love someone, you can't get enough of them. You just want to know more and more about them and read and like look at that glorious example, because we know that is how the Muslim can attain good character, that how he conducted himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is he was the best of teachers, and that is the best of examples in learning how to conduct yourself with other people. And when we do that it just touches people's hearts. It's so beautiful how he was with other people. They say that the people who are around the Prophet ﷺ, that each person, just from how he conducted himself with them, each person thought that they were the most beloved person to the Prophet ﷺ. And there's stories of that, which companion was it that it was?
Several.
Of them asking, am I more beloved than Abu Bakr? Am I more beloved than Umar? And each time, like, he didn't say yes, but just, it shows you to what degree did each person think that they were the favorite of the Prophet ﷺ. So we have to reflect on, how much do we make the people around us feel that they're the most beloved to us in how we treat them.
And there's just three things very quickly. One of these is, this connects with the importance of intentionality, of making intention, right? And there's a lot that's said in contemporary discussion on developing good habits and so on being purposeful, right? On being purposeful. But Islamically, how are we purposeful in anything that we do? Is intention. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are by their intentions. So in any human interaction, before you make it, strive to make it good intention. You come downstairs and your spouse is sitting there, make an intention. What can I do to bring happiness to them? How can I make them happy? Why? Because I want to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It could be something very small, right? Even when you're entering the US border, which can be a challenging endeavor, sometimes we get benefits. We had Sheikh Mohsen al-Najjar for the whole weekend because the US did not let him in. But, one of my good friends, Sheikh Abdul Karim Yahya, said every time I enter the United States, I make 5 intentions. I intend to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by patience, by upholding good character, by calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by having a good example, by following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in my dealings. This is with, and he, being not only Muslim but also African American, he had many things going against him in terms of crossing the US border. But this idea of committing to prophetic character, what is from intention? When you go visit your parents, when you're dealing with your spouse, make that intention. Renew that intention when you're tested. That I want to respond in a manner pleasing to Allah. That's testing. That's number one. Number two, in exemplifying prophetic character, one of the big mistakes that we make as Muslims is that we misalign our relationship to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is not just the source of do's and don'ts. That there's someone in the family who'd put up on their fridge, I forget how many, 77 sunnahs of the Prophet, do's and don'ts of 77 do's and don'ts of the sunnah. And the person was frankly borderline really annoying. I took that piece of paper, I folded it, I put it deep in their recycling. Because a very hostile understanding of the sunnah. The sunnah is, do this, do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. That we approach the sunnah through two subjects. One is just, do all these things, don't do all these things. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ is just the source of a whole list of do's and don'ts. And the other is reading about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. But the life of the Prophet ﷺ is what happened to the Prophet ﷺ. The more fundamental question is, who did those things happen to? Which is why classically the subject that the ulama emphasize learning before studying the seerah, or that emphasize studying as you study the seerah, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, is to learn about the person of the Prophet ﷺ. And that science called the shama'il, the description of the physical appearance, but particularly the character, the conduct, and the habits of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And that's critical. And only when you understand who he was, can you really appreciate his life. So that's very critical. And that's very important in our times for ourselves and within our families. Because the sunnah isn't just, did you use the siwak? Did you pray duha? Did you do this? Did you do this? Right? And it's much easier to demand the sunnah from others than from yourself. But the sunnah is mercy. It is love. It is good character. It is humility. Right? It is concern for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's gratitude. It is these qualities. So that's something that one should spend time learning about the prophetic character. Learning about the person of the Prophet ﷺ, his habits, right? The heart of the Prophet ﷺ, how he was in his relationship with Allah and how he was with his relationship with people. And we have, alhamdulillah, a whole host of resources on Seeker's Guidance related to this. One of them, it was in a class we conducted a couple of years ago at Seekers called the Prophet's Heart. Focused on practical examples of the Prophet's relationship with his Lord and the Prophet's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. There's many other resources related to that. Ustad Amjad Tarsin's series on soul food focuses a lot on the sunnah of the Prophet related to our character, how we are. And that's very, very important. And strive to have some weekly point of connection with this. That weekly there's something that you're increasing in some way in understanding and reflection upon the prophetic character. But knowledge is meant to be like a mirror in which you look at yourself to see, what do I need to fix to be more presentable when you stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And just one story I wanted to share personally is one of the stories that I really think about when I was thinking of the story. There's a lot of stories that we hear about the Prophet ﷺ and his character, but one of the stories that stand out in my mind was the example of, I believe it was Abu Lahab's wife, Jamil, who would leave, they describe it as thorny branches of like, it's like an underbrush kind of, that was left on the doorstep of the Prophet ﷺ on a regular basis. So I've heard that story so many times, and just recently I was pruning a large area actually in front of the building of rose bushes, where it's a number of thorny branches were coming out and in a big pile. And subhanAllah, this story, it really stuck out in my mind because now we have gardening gloves and we can, even with gardening gloves, it's difficult to move that type of obstruction, right? So when you read about the Prophet ﷺ and how, on a regular basis, he would clean this from his doorstep. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Like, in the clothes they had, he did not have gloves, and he would do this, and, we know that, he just wanted good for the people around him. And that, when it would come on a regular basis on his doorstep and he would just remove it. And then the day that she didn't come, because, he inquired after her health. SubhanAllah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I think a lot of us, if somebody was trying to insult us in that manner, a lot of our egos get riled up, and then, people start thinking of revenge. But when we look at the example of the Prophet ﷺ and how he was so merciful with the people around him, a lot of the stories can, you can relate to them in your own life, like, and sometimes like that, like it's a story that I had heard many times, but I only thought about it really deeply once I was in a similar situation dealing with that kind of stuff. The next principle is to regularly thank your spouse and children for their contributions to the household and good deeds. That when people in the household do things for you, that you recognize it and you thank them for it. A lot of times, we're so busy or preoccupied with the own things that we're doing or dealing with that we don't really take a moment to step back and realize, so-and-so just did X, Y, and Z for me, or maybe they spent a lot of effort doing this, or, and not being grateful for that. So especially with children or with one's spouse, that you thank them for everything that they're doing, and take that time out to reflect on that, not to be so self-centered that you're not aware of what the people around you are doing and how they are contributing to the household without being asked a lot of times. The Prophet ﷺ cautioned us that whoever is not thankful to people is not thankful to Allah. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So it's important to remember that with both the big things and even the small things, right? Even the example of the socks on the side of the room. If the next time you pass by and you notice they're gone, thank the person who moved them for you. Of course, that's not an issue with our house, just because that was an issue in the other sister's house. But just being aware of that, and also being aware of how other people are feeling. I think a lot of times we're very focused on what people say, but there's a lot of cues you can pick up from the people around you in how they're behaving. You can tell if somebody's tired or overworked or worried, so you would strive to do extra things for them, right? And that's also a way of thanking them for the things they've done for you, that you're continuously trying to almost repay them or do good back to them. So it's a continuous cycle of each person doing good for the other person.
A beautiful, there's so many examples of that from the Prophet ﷺ, that from his gratitude, for example, to say that Khadija is years after she passed away, he would still send gifts to her old friends. And they say that from being good to one's parents is to be good to the friends of one's parents. From being good to one's spouse is to be good to the friends of one's spouse, right? And to be in a positive way, to think of their interest, right? The Prophet, and you see an example of that in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, in the relation between Sayyidah Khadija and the Prophet ﷺ, right when the revelation came, right? That there's no human experience possible that is as intense as receiving revelation. Right? Imagine receiving a direct message from the creator and sustainer of the heavens and the earth. This is the most shaking experience. Nothing, loss of a loved one, illness, sickness, shock, accident, there's nothing. This is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described, that had revelation come directly on a mountain, it would crumble. Only prophets are even fit to receive this revelation. But it initially used to be a big burden on the Prophet. إِنَّا سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. We will cast down upon you a weighty word. But what did the first thing he did? He went home to Sayyidah Khadija. Even though his uncle was still alive, he had trusted friends like Abu Bakr, right? Lifetime friends. First person he went to was his wife. But then, what did she do to comfort him in this big burden? She recognized all the good that he did, this positive validation. Right? It's very important that Allah would never forsake you, because you maintain family ties, you assist the orphan and the needy and this, and mention all these things. And this is from recognizing the good that they do, validating them. They may be struggling at work. They may be between jobs, and they're trying to hold it in. They're trying to put on a strong front. But don't let them just stand strong there. Be لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. Right? That Allah has granted the spouses so you may find sukoon, serenity there, and be the support for one another, right? In that sense. And this is how, by recognizing that their good qualities, the good things that they do, even professionally, the good skills that they have, that validation is from gratitude towards them. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ. They are a garment for you. And one of the important ways is to appreciate the little things. The little things. Like someone goes shopping, they bought 25 things when they went shopping. Don't immediately say, oh, you didn't buy the right kind of organic spicy ketchup. And you went through the whole grocery list, brought everything. One thing you got it wrong. Rather, begin with the positive. Right? Begin with the positive. And this is difficult because our temperaments incline towards lowliness in many things. جُبِلَتِ الْأَنفُسُ الشُّحْ. The human temperament inclines towards cheapness. But we have the possibility of nobility, right? And one of the things is to be expressively thankful for their, and likewise for the children. Sometimes we become like cops for the children. You didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do the dishes, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. But they're doing a lot of things. Recognize those things out of gratitude to Allah. This changes our life perspective too. If you just, and one of the components of this, and this of course always a struggle, and may Allah grant us to uphold this prophetic character. One of the poets said that إذا ما رأيت الله في الكل فاعلا رأيت كل الكائنات ملاحا. If you behold Allah in all things as the true actor, you see all things in life as beautiful, as pleasing. وَإِذَا لَمْ تَرَ سِوَى مَظَاهِرَ خَلْقِهِ. And if all you see is the appearances of created things, سَيَرْتَ الْمِلَاحَةُ قِبَاحًا. If all you see is the vestiges of His creation, just the created things themselves, you turn something so beautiful into something so ugly. Because those are opportunities, right? I have a friend, we just had dinner with him last night. When he got married, and two very different backgrounds and temperaments, what they would do, him and his wife, that at any time they'd have an argument, whoever could make the other person laugh first would get $5. 22 years ago, $5 meant a lot more than now, right? Appreciating one another in this sense is truly blessed, right? And this is the key, that the gratitude that we have for others is that we see them as gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even in difficulty, we see this as an opportunity. idfa' billati hiya ahsan. Respond in the way that is better. Why? Because you're not a servant of your emotions, you're not a servant of your sense of self, you are a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who are you? You are an ambassador of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So we should all strive for what is better. And then finally, to have humility. It's very important. One of the qualities to embrace in marriage is humility, that if we fall short, we fail, whether as spouses or as parents, to recognize, to have the humility to recognize that wasn't correct, you apologize and you rectify. And sometimes this is a common mistake as parents people don't do. They sort of defend their own mistake to their children. Apologize. Now, all of these things, one caveat before we close, is that all the things that we mentioned are in the normal state of affairs, right? In the normal state of affairs. We're not talking about a situation where there's wrongdoing, where there's oppression, there's abuse, right? Someone is demanding 100 things from you, above and beyond what's reasonable, and then you say, okay, well, it's an honor to serve, so I'm gonna like crush myself and do 5 more. We're not talking about the exceptional cases, right? That's very, very important. It's one of the things that we'll be talking about, is distinguish between 2 things. There is no merit in our religion in complaining. Right? A lot of times what people do is that they're struggling in marriage or in life or in relations or with their parents or in any human relation or circumstance. They have a circle of friends and they go there just to vent, to complain. This is spiritually detrimental, emotionally detrimental, because it's frustrating, because you said all this stuff, but did it change anything? No. Right? And a lot of people remain, it's like a temporary release. So someone is in a situation, they're being abused, but Saturdays they go have tea with a circle of friends and they complain about their husband or their wife. That made me feel better. No, it didn't. Actually, so you get a temporary release that, okay, I got that out of my chest, but the frustration keeps mounting. This burden and the hurt and harm keeps piling up. So in our religiously and spiritually, it's very clear that complaint has no merit, but consultation does. Consultation does. Consultation is, rather than just speak to a whole bunch of friends, consider who would give me good advice. Right? It may not be your closest friends, the guys you hang out with, but there's someone whose judgment you trust. Go talk to them. Go talk to a scholar, someone elder in the family. And the purpose of consultation is to give you clarity of how to make things better. Right? So that's an important caveat to keep in mind. We'll be talking further about this, right? That we're talking about a situation where the marriage is in a state of broad goodness and how we increase that goodness. The situations where there's abuse or harm or unreasonable conduct will be coming at that, at how one deals with those situations. That's one of the areas we'll be looking at in upcoming lessons. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Any final one?
No, just what you were just saying when you're talking about, there are circumstances where someone's being oppressed, and obviously that's not what we're talking about. It just brought to mind a story of, there was a sister who came to me once, and she was talking about some of the problems she was having, and she didn't realize that they were extremely odd. And so I did counsel her towards a divorce, given the circumstance. She didn't because she was a new Muslim as well, she didn't realize how severe some of the issues she was facing were. But subhanAllah, just the way her life unfolded, and I'm just so happy about seeing like how her life changed after that, because she ended up getting out of a very toxic situation. She remarried, and then she married like a very, mashallah, very beautiful brother, and her life is so happy now, mashallah. So it's just important to realize that we're talking, like what Sheikh Faraz mentioned, that we're talking about healthy situations here, where sometimes the situation is just a little bit, not the greatest, but it can be fine-tuned. But we're not talking about an extremely toxic situation where professional help is needed. So, I just have love for that in it.
Alhamdulillah. So we'll continue from principle 21 next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And I'd like to encourage myself and each of us to really, one of the really keys in the marriage is that a successful Muslim marriage is one that takes the Prophet ﷺ as its imam, right? That takes the Messenger ﷺ as its imam, that takes the values of love and mercy as its governing values, and that approaches marriage as an opportunity to seek the pleasure of Allah, both in what you do regularly in marriage, but also how you respond to the challenges that arise. There's one question. The Prophet ﷺ told us, Istafti qalbak, seek an answer from your heart. So what is the question that one asks the heart, for which one seeks an answer from the heart? The heart is the faculty within the human being that inclines towards the pleasure of Allah. And the question that one asks the heart is, what action, what response is most likely to be pleasing to Allah? That's the question one asks the heart, and follow that answer, and you'll find success. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us healthy marriages in which we seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we strive to pursue the good of this life and the next, and in which we have these qualities of gratitude, of love and mercy and patience with one another, of striving to serve and acknowledge one another and assist one another in fulfilling our worldly goals and our spiritual goals for ourselves and for our families. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We have a few minutes if there's any questions. Bismillah ta'ala.